Have you noticed the price of potting mix these days? Crikey, it can cost a lot to fill a container and a small fortune to fill a raised bed. Want your garden to save you money? Then using less potting mix to get better results is essential. So how can we eke out potting mixes and save big on composts? Well, I'm about to show you 5 simple ways to craftily scrimp out your mixes, reuse them, and my personal favourite, fill raised beds for next to nothing. Are you ready to save money? Come on, let me show you. It never ceases to amaze me how much potting mix you can get through, especially early on in the season. But ask yourself, do you really need to fill all of the container with pricey mix? Many shallow-rooted crops like salad leaves, radish, or these rather frozen strawberries here will cope in potting mix depths of as little as 6 inches or 15 centimetres. So if you've got a deeper pot like this, for example, do you really need to use potting mix below all of this? Instead, you can part fill your containers. You could use things like twiggy sticks and materials, old straw for example, leaves or leaf mould, or indeed old reused potting mix. Use this table for an idea of the minimum depths of quality potting mix you should be aiming for, and then cut corners on anything beneath this. Now there are some crops that need plenty of deep, fertile soil. For heavy feeders such as squash and cucumbers, a great option is to fill the deeper layers with especially nutrient-dense materials, such as the freshly cut leaves of nutrient accumulators like comfrey. That's what I did with my container-grown zucchini or courgette this summer, and it really thrived, and then the leaves broke down and gradually fed the plant over the summer months. So I've got some old potting mix here, but we can reuse it. There's life in the old potting mix yet. The first job is just to tip it out and then scrunch it down, and then we're just going to pick out some of the larger bits of root. It doesn't matter if bits are left in the potting mix here because they kind of will rot down anyway and add further organic matter, but just get the worst of it out and separate it out so it's nice and loose like this. Leave it to dry out, this is actually dry already, and then store it in some sort of lidded container or bags that are scrunched down to keep it all clean and dry. And then let me show you how I go about reviving this old mix. So I've got my old mix here, and then we want to add about the same again by volume of our fresh new potting mix here. There we go. And then just for a bit of extra fertility to counterbalance the fact this side's exhausted, I'm going to add in just a couple of small handfuls of blood, fish and bone meal. This is an organic, slow-release fertiliser if you like, and there are vegan options of different organic fertilisers instead if you prefer. Now it's just a question of getting your hands in there and mixing it all up, which is the quite satisfying bit as it all comes back to life. Oh, great stuff. It's coming together beautifully now. Now, of course, reusing potting mix does carry a small risk of passing on soil-borne diseases. One way to reduce that risk is to use only potting mix that grew flowers in to grow vegetables in the second time round, and vice versa. And of course, if potting mixes contain plants that were heavily diseased, then best to avoid it altogether. There we are. This looks beautiful, crumbly and ready to go. Magic. Oh, I'll tell you what, there's no better way of warming up on a chilly day than digging out the compost heap. Both new and rejuvenated potting mixes can be made to go further if we mix it with a beautiful garden-made compost or leaf mould or sand, depending on what you want to grow in it. Rich, dark compost is a fantastic source of goodness for heavy feeders, so mix sieved up compost with your potting mix to create an extra fertile growing medium for heavy feeders like potatoes, tomatoes, squash family plants and brassicas such as cabbage. They'll really appreciate the extra moist, nutrient-heavy environment that this stuff should create. Conversely, other crops grow better in a less rich mix. Carrots, for example, love free-draining soil and so will grow well in a potting mix that's been cut with sand. Now perhaps you can pick up sand very cheaply, or maybe you've got an old sand pit that you can plunder. If you have to buy the stuff, horticultural or gardening sand is great, but builder's sand is even cheaper and does a great job too. Just mix equal parts of your potting mix and sand to create that lovely free draining mix. Now, if you'd like to learn how to make your own potting mixes from scratch, then do check out our video on that. I'll pop a link to it in the description below. And while you're down there, do subscribe and ding that notification bell so we can let you know of all our upcoming videos. Compost pits or trenches are a great way to save on bought-in compost or to make your own garden-made compost go a little bit further. Let's demonstrate in this bed here where I will be growing next season my zucchini or courgettes. These plants love a rich soil, but rather than laying compost on top, I'm going to start by digging a hole so I can put all of my organic matter into that. And now with the hole dug, I'm going to add in just some kitchen scraps I've saved. And what this will do is it will rot down over the course of the winter to provide a lovely, rich, nutrient-dense layer that those roots are going to grow down into, and things like zucchini or courgette will absolutely love to get their teeth into. With it all filled up, you can then just go back in with the soil you've dug out on top just to cover it over. And that makes sure that things like foxes don't get a whiff of it and start digging around. Now it'll leave a slight mound as you fill, and that's fine, it'll sink down over the course of the winter. And then just so you don't forget where you've dug your holes, it's always useful to stick a bit of a cane or stick on top just to mark the position come planting time. And then over here, I'm going to dig some trenches either side of the arch here, fill that with kitchen scraps and cover them back. And then there'll be a nice, moist, fertile cushion to plant my beans into next spring. Obviously, it takes a while to save kitchen scraps, so I can do one bit at a time over the course of the winter. And now for my favourite way to save your hard-earned money. Filling raised beds or creating new planting areas for free using organic material that you've got lying around. Now, much like our compost pits or trenches, we're going to use materials that will compost down over the winter, and then by spring we'll have a lovely planting material that we can sow or plant straight into. Let me show you how this all works by creating a new planting area here, and we'll be using a technique called lasagna planting. Now, just like lasagna, this uses layers of materials on top of each other to gradually build things up. I'm using one of these pallet collar beds here because it keeps everything nice and tidy, but of course you could just create your planting area without any sides, that's just fine. My first job is to dig this into position and then we can start filling. Great, there's our beds all levelled up and nicely installed. Now, to be on the safe side, I'm going to layer the bottom with sheets of cardboard. This just makes sure that any grass or weeds run out of energy before they push through to the top. Do take the effort and time to layer the cardboard so it nicely overlaps so there aren't any gaps. And now let's start layering up our ingredients. You want to alternate between carbon-rich browns and nutrient-laden greens. And I'm starting off with our browns, for which I'm using this old straw here that's partly decomposed already. Now, you want to layer it at about a 2 to 4 inch depth, that's 5 to 10 centimetres to start with, and all our layers will be about that deep. And then it's in with a similar depth of greens, in this case spent crops and garden trimmings. And then another layer of browns and then greens and so on until we've got a depth of about 18 inches or 45 centimetres, and ideally more if you have more material available. This here is some raked up leaves which has got loads of grass and old stems in it as well, so it's a good balance of browns and greens. Let's get that in. If it's dry, then just give everything a good water to help it start decomposing. Now this might look a bit too piled up right now, but believe me, within a few weeks this will start slumping down as it begins to rot down. Late autumn or winter is a great time to start new beds off like this, because the repeated freezing and thawing helps to break things down a little bit as well. If come spring it hasn't all decomposed, then you can always cap it off with a 1 or 2 inch, say 3 to 5 centimetre layer of compost and then plant into that. An alternative to the lasagna method is to progressively build up beds, starting with larger bits of organic matter to smaller bits and then finishing off with a cap of compost or soil. This is what I did to a lesser extent with some of the beds around me here. So for example, you might start off with sawn up bits of log like this, then sticks and twiggy material, part filling the beds with sticks and prunings to save on bought-in compost, before going in with plant waste such as dead leaves and then your compost on top of that. The other bonus of this is that as the woodier material slowly breaks down, it releases back the nutrients it contains to feed your plants, much like a slow-release fertiliser. And if you'd like to know more about how to make and use your own compost, then I invite you to binge watch this playlist. In it, you'll find some ingenious ways to feed your plants for free, build soil health, and my step-by-step guide to creating a new vegetable garden in under an hour. I'll catch you next time.